So again, as I sort of touched on at the top, you worked at GameSpot doing games media in the mid-90s. So at what point during that do you get the bug to cross over to game development, or was that bug just always there?
You know, actually, I was really proud of the fact that there was some developer at the time was like, oh, you game journalists just want to make games, and I was like, no, I really enjoy working as a game journalist, and it was super fun gig. But after about 8 years of working on magazines and websites, I really wanted to try new challenges, and started working up samples in the Infinity engine for Neverwinter Nights.
Sure, yeah, BioWare, their tech.
Yeah, it was I familiarized myself and kind of taught myself that engine, and you know, when I first went to do some of my early interviews for game design, even just talking through some of the bugs and issues I came up with and how I kind of circumvented them really helped me get my foot in the door.
That's interesting. So even when you decided to start trying to dip your toe in the water, you picked you picked RPG tech.
I did.
To do it with.
Yeah.
Was that well, I wonder if that was even a conscious decision on your part, or if you just sort of naturally gravitated towards that.
That's a good question. I don't know. I know I felt like I knew modules pretty well, and I knew story well enough from my background, and a fun place to kind of dive in. It was funny because later on, I think Knights of the Old Republic 2 came out and had a few bugs on chip, and I was familiar with those bugs from having worked with that engine just and privately. I'm like, oh yeah, I remember that. Oh wow, you know.
So it sounds like nobody like lured you into it and said, hey Joe, we think you'd be. It sounds like you kind of found your own way into it.
I mean, every job I've ever gotten, I've looked out where people helped me with opportunities, you know, from even the start, working on magazines and whatnot. Getting a foot in the door to work on the Medal of Honor series at EA was another former game journalist, Kevin Perry, who had made the jump from computer game review and knew that people could do that, make that jump.
Right.
So, yeah.
So, looking back, are there any reviews that, now that you're on the other side making games, are there any reviews that you look back on, or articles at all where you think, oh man, that was I didn't do that very well, or maybe I got this wrong, or
yeah, I mean, there's definitely, you know, over years that you know, working on game reviews and reviewing hundreds of games, there's probably a few in there where I'm like, oh wow. You know, there's definitely, you know, when I'm talking with other developers, I try not to bring up any reviews that I may have reviewed one of their games and maybe not given it a stellar review. If Warren Spector is listening, don't go and read one of my old Deus Ex 2 reviews, Warren.
Oh no! Do you feel like your time in games media has helped you as a game developer at all, or?
Yeah, I definitely, you know, I definitely look at things from, you know, a reviewer standpoint. I definitely look at games from a player standpoint, from experience. And one of the first things that I worked on for games writing was developing AI VO systems, basically combat dialogue.
Yeah.
And really, one of the things that really got under my skin as a reviewer was if you would hear the same line of dialogue multiple times, and it really took you out of the experience.
Sure.
So every game I've ever worked on, I'm like, no, we have to make sure there's, you know, dozens of variations, even if it's just a tonal difference.
Right.
So I definitely really think about things as far as how is the player going to experience this? How is the reviewer? How is anyone really going to experience this? How is it all going to come together in a coherent way?
Right. Do you do you read reviews of your games?
I do. And sometimes with a little trepidation, but you know, sometimes the games that are the most fun to work on don't get the highest score, and sometimes the games that are really rough to work on, you know, get higher scores. So it's a little back and forth. You always are you know, proud of the work, but it's you know, it's somebody representing their experience with the game, so it's totally honest.
I'd love to hear a little bit more about the first part of that, because I can understand the, you know, the games that were you kind of had to trudge through and just gut it out and end up being reviewed well, because you've you've been through the battles and you turned out a product that people like. But you said there were times where you had a lot of fun on games that didn't necessarily end up getting reviewed super well.
Yeah.
You don't have to necessarily name any names sitting here, but I'm sort of curious what you mean by that.
Yeah, I'd say the second game that I ever worked on, Medal of Honor Vanguard, was one of the most fun games that I ever worked on because it was the first game that I got to write for.
Yeah.
I was a level designer for it. I was an associate producer for it. I helped develop the AI VO system for combat dialogue and work with some really fantastic engineers to make that all come together. Wore a lot of hats on that, and it was definitely a game that it was one of the last games for the PlayStation 2, kind of an aging engine. But I learned so much, and I had a chance to really touch so many different spots of that game, and it was a great experience. It was really fun, and maybe in the score side, not the highest scoring game I've ever worked on.
Well, when you first cross over and you're working on a video game, after spending years reporting on them and covering them and reviewing them, like I think about that for myself sometimes. Like I love what I do. I don't necessarily have any interest in making games at this point in my life, but when I run through the scenario in my head, I feel like, man, I would just feel totally inferior on a development team because I'm just this like media lackey guy that's now in here trying to be part of the team. Like, how's your mindset when you're first making that jump from media to development? Because I'm just sort of personally, maybe no one else might care, but I'm kind of curious.
It was definitely tough. I definitely going from the point where working on GameSpot, I was doing interviews with the BBC and CNN about my feelings on games, and then starting as a level designer and really seeing how much I didn't know about making games. It was definitely reset on the ego.
Yeah.
But not in a totally bad way. It was really great to be able to look at it from the other angle and to really take in the whole process of making games and in a way kind of start from scratch on it.
Well, dovetailing off of something you just said is, I would say, what's the biggest thing that surprised you about game development that you didn't realize from the journalism side?
Wow, it is a tough process. It is definitely it is a managed disaster throughout. It's a series of putting out fires throughout and really kind of making the best decisions possible. It's tough. It's but it's also really fun and coming up with creative solutions to tough problems, both time and manpower and whatnot. While still managing to have everything come together in a fun way and innovate. Man, it's a really challenging system. Making games it's never boring.
I mean, that makes a ton of sense. I mean, there's always something new every day in some way, I'm sure, whether it's a challenge or a triumph, a breakthrough of some kind, or a new build, or what have you.
Yeah, it definitely, for making games, there's definitely, you can learn from past experiences and learn from other games and things like that, but if you're really attempting to innovate, as many of us are trying to do, you're really trying to, push and come up with things that are kind of uncharted territory. And things like for, BioShock Infinite, there was a lot of things like with the skylines that, that was kind of hanging on to a roller coaster. Ken had a really clear vision of what he wanted to see for that, but that was really a tough thing to, bring together in a coherent, fun way.
Right.
Yeah, I think it turned out pretty well.